Hello. This story is part of a series titled Memories of Tehran. I was 10 years old when Dad decided to take the family to India because Brother and I were going to have our Navjote. A Navjote is a coming-of-age ceremony for Zoroastrians from India, I should say primarily from India, or also known as Parsis. It was also a time to meet Dad's family, his brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews that I had never met before, with the exception of little Grandpa. So it turned out to be quite a celebration. So to prepare for the trip, I brought my little prayer hat with me. It's called a topi. Welcome to Storytime with Q Max. My name is Kayo Jijina, and this is my story titled A Navjote, The Rat and the Rupee. I hope you enjoy it. The trip from Tehran to Mumbai, or Bombay, as our relatives used to call it, had been a long one. We traveled standby on Iran Air, first west to London, where we made our connection, then east to India. Dad had worked with his family to plan our Navjote, a coming-of-age ceremony for those of the Parsi or the Zoroastrian faith. Due to the closeness in age, Dad decided on a 2-for-1 special. Brother and I would go through the ceremony together. My face remained pressed against the car window as we drove down abandoned streets that now lay quiet. The homeless were everywhere and slept on the streets, some just beyond arm's reach. It felt like we were driving through people's bedrooms. Our vehicle came to a stop while the driver patiently waited for a traffic light to change. A sparkle of light drew my attention towards a dark alley where a family of 4, a man, a woman, and 2 young girls, slept. The sparkle, like that of a diamond, came from the feet of one of the girls. She was no more than 4. I watched in horror as the shape behind the glitter came into focus. It was a rat, and the hairy mongrel was looking at me. The sparkle came from its eyes, and it had a lock on me, not letting go. I saw movement coming from inside the alley. It was not just one rat, but a whole platoon. The alley behind the family was overrun with rats. I was glad to have a car door as a barrier and a window to look through. Somehow, it made me feel safe inside. I reminded myself that this was no longer Tehran, and I needed to keep an open mind when it came to travel. But the mind had trouble letting go. The light changed and the car moved on. As I looked back one more time, I saw old Sparkle Eyes. He was still looking at me with one fist in the air, as if vowing revenge for the intrusion on his sacred space. Not long after, we arrived at our destination and began the arduous task of unloading luggage. One of the suitcases was filled with gifts for the cousins and would be filled with souvenirs from India for the trip back. Dad carried that one. We stayed with family, and in spite of the hour, the relatives were happy to see us. An overwhelming feeling came across me as I met relatives I had never seen before. They were full of hugs and kisses and welcomed us with warm arms. Brother and I split off from Mom and Dad and sister as the relatives provided the accommodations for our stay. At Dan Auntie's home, the 2 cousins were asleep, as was Firo's uncle. The house was dimly lit by a single bulb casting a heavy shadow. Since my arrival at India, everything felt surreal, like walking in a sepia-toned dream. In the kitchen, Auntie fixed us a bite to eat. As she prepared the food, she tossed the scraps out the kitchen window. I gave her a puzzled look. "Ah, chalo," came the explanation. "Let's eat. We have a garbage strike in Bombay, and no one is collecting, so this is what we have to do." Now I understood why I had seen so many rats on the ride over. The city was offering an all-you-could-eat buffet. Finding my bed at last and closing my eyes, I kept seeing old Sparkle Eyes, the rat I had intruded upon. I saw him in the shadows at the foot of my bed. Somehow, he had found me. By this time, I was so tired I could no longer keep my focus, and the weight of my body felt like a ton of bricks. I fell asleep as I planned my next move. The next day, I awoke to a new world. I looked at my feet in an effort to determine if old Sparkle Eyes had visited me in the night. I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank goodness I still had all my toes. The color returned and everything seemed a little clearer. I learned we were inside a walled Parsi community where everything was neat, clean, and orderly. There were trees, flowers, and beautiful gardens. From the apartment window, I watched a man dressed in a thin white shirt and loincloth as he climbed barefoot up the side of a coconut tree that was about 20 feet tall. Auntie walked us to a section of the wall where steps led to a platform, and I could get a better look at the outside. On the other side lay the India I had seen last night. I saw tin shacks with cardboard roofs, a trail of people walking. Some carried baskets balanced on their heads, as other rode carts hitched to cows pulling small loads. Children ran and played everywhere. The contrast in living conditions made me feel like I was spying into a forbidden world. Aunties and uncles were coming in for the Navjote from all over, and cousins I had never seen before. I could tell the Navjote ceremony was an important, festive occasion, even though I had never been to one before. Brother and I had been reciting our prayers, trying to memorize them before the big day. The first two prayers, Ashambho and Yatavedio, I knew by heart. Kimnamazda was much longer and slower in coming to me. The others I struggled with. On the day of the Navjote, I remember going to the temple where everything was decorated with flowers, and the smell of sandalwood incense permeated the air. The aunties were dressed in beautiful saris, carrying trays of stuff you could not eat, like raw rice, coconuts, and garlands. For a time we stood before the priests and went through many iterations of stand up and sit down, as they recited prayers in an ancient language I did not understand. In addition to family, most of the people who lived in the Parsi community were invited. It was one of those customs where you had to invite everyone and they all came. Row after row of tables had been set up in the hall for dinner, and everyone was fed. After a while, Shirin Auntie walked Brother and me around to introduce us to our guests and thank them for coming. As we did, our guests gave us envelopes, which Auntie collected and stuffed into Dad's blue Pan-Am bag. I asked if I could open one of the envelopes and look inside. There was a 100 rupee note. I wanted to hang on to some of the envelopes I was given, but Auntie suggested I discuss it with Dad first. It reminded me of our Persian Nowruz or New Year celebration in Tehran, when we would visit family and they would give us money in envelopes as we left. In the early days, we had to hand the envelopes over to Mom. As we completed our rounds, Auntie got busy talking to one of her neighbors, an older couple. It gave me a few minutes to look around. It was late, and the place was thinning out, as some of the guests had returned home. I stood there waiting and noticed movement just past the last row of tables, over by a low wall. I watched. A moment later, I saw him. It was old Sparkle Eyes. He had come to pay his respects. No doubt he had heard of my Navjote. I reached over to the table, peeled a thin piece of chapati, bread, rolled it and tossed it in his direction. The way I saw it was when you have a celebration, you feed all the guests who come to partake, even the rats. Perhaps with my peace offering, old Sparkle Eyes and I might call it a truce. Later in the evening, I asked Dad about the money in the envelopes and if I could keep a few of them.
Well, son,
It is customary for the money to be used to pay for expenses of the Navjote. Things like paying for priests, the hall rentals, tables, chairs, and food. That is how it has always been done. I understood the explanation but did not see the point. Mom and Dad had given us a gold coin, which we also had to turn over at the end of the evening. As things quieted down, Nari uncle, who had been taking care of Sister, stopped by and handed me a white envelope. "This one is for you to keep," he said. I ripped it open, and inside was an old Indian rupee. The coin had the image of King Edward engraved on it, and dated 1906. "Take good care of it," he said as he left. That night I slept well. It was the first night since my visit when I did not dream of old Sparkle Eyes coming to pay me a visit. The next day I ran into Grandpa Dorabji, or Little Grandpa as I used to call him. He was dressed in his traditional whites, white jacket with no collar, white pants and shirt. On his head he wore a traditional prayer cap, or topi, as he would sometimes call it. I pulled a coin out of my pocket and showed it to him. Grandpa examined the coin and asked me what I had planned to do with it. I told him Nari uncle had given it to me and I did not quite know. I might like to spend it. Grandpa promptly placed the coin in his shirt pocket. Next, he reached over to his pants pocket and pulled out his wallet. Using his one good eye, he scanned the wallet until he found a single rupee note and handed it to me. "There, Baba, you can spend this." A little miffed by what had taken place, I mentioned it to Mom. Mom marched up to Little Grandpa and demanded the coin back. Some words were exchanged in Gujarati, and Little Grandpa walked away. To this day, I'm not quite sure what Grandpa did with the coin. Perhaps it was advance payment for some advice he would be offering me in a few years' time.